Well, this week we're reading Plato's dialogue Euthyphro, which is it's a short dialogue that Plato wrote in the beginning of his career, or presumably early in his career. It's one of the shorter dialogues. I felt, if you're doing a course on philosophy as critical reasoning, Plato and his dialogues is really kind of an essential thing. And Euthyphro is that wonderful example of a brief Platonic dialogue, which, though it goes into different areas, is manageable. It's readable in a week. It may not be as so easy, especially this week, to fit it into the rubric, the form of the general assignment. What is the main conclusion? It's not an argumentative essay. It is a conversation between two people. But it contains heaps of reasoning, right? And one has to, I suppose, again, engage in a kind of an interpretation of what the overall point of the dialogue is, because, again, it's not an argumentative essay. It is a conversation. But it's a conversation which focuses on a certain point, obviously, about this question of what is piety, but gets us into other areas too, like what is the best way to ask a question like what is piety, or how do we begin to answer it? And then how do we begin to evaluate the kind of answers that we come up with? I don't, there's nothing that I need to say to explain this dialogue. You simply have to read it. But let me give you a few things. First of all, in reading any Platonic dialogue in which this writer, Plato, uses the figure of his friend Socrates as a sort of main character in these philosophical conversations, that there's usually a greater or lesser degree of irony in a lot of what Socrates says. And so I think to Euthyphro, there's a greater degree of irony. I think that one of the things that you'll pick up on pretty quickly if you're reading attentively is that Euthyphro is not that bright. And Socrates is being ironic with him when he says, you're my teacher, you got to show me. I mean, he's being perfectly nice to Euthyphro, but he is kidding with him a little bit. And what he's trying to actually do for Euthyphro is, again, why is he having this conversation? What is he trying to get out of it, Socrates? And whatever point is Plato trying to make here, which is a decision that you need to make. Plato being the writer of the dialogue, Socrates being the historical figure, the person that Plato certainly knew, but is more or less used as a character in these dialogues as a way of expressing ideas, which may be Socrates' ideas, but were certainly Plato's ideas. Now you have to make a decision about, what is Plato really getting at here? This is a wonderful dialogue. And parts of it can get a little tricky. As you'll see, Socrates asks Euthyphro, to define piety. And after some stops and starts and some difficulties, Euthyphro defines it as what all the gods love, that what the gods love and all the gods love, and you'll see why that qualification is important, is the pious, is piety. And then Socrates says, at a certain point, I guess a sort of midpoint in the dialogue, this very, very famous part where he says, it's right here. I don't know what page it would be. He says, the point which I should first wish to understand is whether the pious or holy is beloved by the gods because it is holy, or holy because it is beloved of the gods. That distinction, fairly subtle distinction, is really incredibly key in understanding this dialogue. Basically, saying is something pious because it's loved by the gods, or do the gods love it because it's pious? And that's a fairly simple idea, a fairly clear idea, but sometimes in the way that it's actually spoken of and spelled out, it can get a little maddening. Uh, but it's definitely getting at a really interesting point about what we consider, maybe the basis of religion, whether something is good because the gods love it, or whether the gods love it because it's good, is actually a fairly familiar problem, I think, for people when they're thinking about religion, and especially the relationship between ethics and duty and morality in religion. It's a very important point. It's just that it can get a little crazy in terms of the way it's expressed here. So it's clear that this dialogue is about many things, but it's definitely about piety and trying to find the nature of piety. And really a very human conversation between these two men, Euthyphro and Socrates. And as I said, the general assignment, the weekly assignment of identifying a main conclusion or an overall point, and identifying the argument that supports that point, won't be easy in application to this dialogue, because the Platonic dialogue is a conversation which is wide-ranging, but there is definitely a unity. I think that you can definitely come up with your own interpretation, obviously based upon the text. Like, everything's based upon the text here. It can't just be a free-floating characterization. It has to be based on what Plato actually wrote. But it will require a certain amount of interpretation, and you're going to have to spend time definitely reading this text, getting to know it, getting familiar with it. And, as always, please read the text. Don't, your characterization of it should be based upon the text, not like Spark Notes or Cliff Notes or the Wikipedia article. It should be a rather barren experience. It's actually the reading of Plato, which is so wonderful, not some silly, stupid secondhand account from someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. So, but you'll have to read it and come to some decisions about what you feel to be the overall point or the main conclusion of it. I mean, here again, I'm calling upon you to be a creative reader, creative and resourceful reader, in coming up with an account of what this dialogue is actually about, what it's trying to put over, how it tries to do that, and whether Plato succeeds in what he's trying to do, what according to you he's trying to do.